Hello, welcome to the latest episode of Mood Awakenings. Uh, this one is called Be Empathetic. Um, it's a narrative that I want to own. Nobody knows that I'm bipolar. You can't tell on the surface. I don't suffer symptoms. The only suffering that I have is from other people's prejudice and stigma. So before you judge, you need to stop and think. Don't write people off and give us a chance. I'm not a criminal. Um, you know, I'm part of a system of misrepresentation that's kind of locked together with a series of stereotypes, and it's transpired to make me isolated from the major parts of the industry that I work in. For 10 years or more now, I've understood that from kind of like a straw poll that's unofficial, that it breaks down kind of something like this. So essentially, 51% of people, they understand and they don't change at all. 39% of people, once they find out that you're bipolar, they kind of over sympathize. And 10% of people are unfortunately quite hostile. So I came up with that paradigm 97, 98. I kind of knew very early that that's what the sort of split is, and I've not really wavered from that throughout my entire professional career. So this episode, based upon what I just said to you there, this episode is based upon duplicity. So you interview me for a job. You love my portfolio. We meet up. Then you check out my references once we've met, which is an obvious thing for a potential employer to do. Then you find out from someone else from my past that I'm bipolar. And then the red warning lights go on. And, as I say, I'm not in control of that narrative. And it's very difficult for me because I get rejected based upon the criteria that I've just mentioned. What's difficult is that this is related to, obviously, the outlying effects of me being born in 1972. If I was probably born in 1992, then at the moment, mental health issues are becoming a much more kind of mainstream, kind of widely understood concept. But for me, as I've come through, I've encountered a lot of prejudice and a lot of unfortunate experiences that have led to me feeling, well, it lowers my self-esteem and my confidence based upon what I'm faced with, which leaves me in the situation where I am today. So, going back in time to the first episode that I experienced in 1995, very quickly, I got a colleague sending me a get well card, and in that get well card, when I was 23 years old, he wrote in there, "Get well, "You're a lunatic." And he used the words "you're a lunatic," I'm sure, in a charming manner from his point of view. And he was trying to break the ice, and he knew that I was in hospital and that something had gone awry. But when you're on the receiving end of that language, it's very difficult to cope with, because it starts to make you be put in a box. A year later, in 1996, I was living in the Lake District in a small village, and I got one of the individuals in there who was part of the football team that I played with. He referred to me as the village idiot. I understand the, I don't know what to refer to it as, but essentially the village idiot, I presume, is something which has gone on for centuries in relation to somebody who may be kind of intellectually less able than somebody else. But in the 90s, to be called that was extremely difficult to be on the end of. It did feel like bullying, and it did affect the way that I approached life, and it made it very difficult. At the same time, the football team that we all played in, they referred to me in round about 1997, age 25, as Don Brennan, which was a character on Coronation Street. And unfortunately, this character had lost his mind, and he'd kidnapped one of the other characters and had kind of captured her in his taxi and driven it into a canal in the middle of Manchester. Unfortunately, my teammates believed that it was something funny and worth applying to me. So each time I had the ball, they would ask me to pass them the ball by shouting, "Hey, Don, give us a ball, Don, pass it square, Don." And, they probably found it really funny, but it really upset and hurt me at the time, because I was only 25. At that particular time, my employer made me redundant, and he told somebody else that I was trying to get a job with in the local area of South Lakes that I was not right in the head. That was unfortunate, because I didn't think that was fair. Shouldn't have disclosed that. It was none of his business. But he felt it like he was protecting the printer that I was going for the job interview for in Barrow, and therefore it led to this position of me feeling like I've had enough. I'm going to leave. I'm going to go back to London. A few years later, I moved back to the district in South Lakeland for a birthday party, which was related to a football match of a bunch of people from that team of the mid to late 90s. And I accepted the invitation and came back. But in the changing rooms before we went out to play, there was a lot of weirdness where a few people are kind of finding it difficult to face me or to be in the presence of me. And I can sense that, and I can appreciate that they're probably regretting some of the stuff that they'd said in the past. But it's one of these things that exists. It becomes this issue where everybody is made to feel uncomfortable by that situation. 1999, having moved back to London a year earlier, I'd got myself into a position at work where I was doing very well, winning work and business, and it had got to a point where I'd come up to a review with my line manager, and my line manager unfortunately said, "You're not going to get promoted because you're not a Jedi yet. Again, even to this day, it's very difficult to hear that sentence because I don't know what the basis of that is. I don't know what the relationship is to the work that I was doing on the ground at the particular time. It was more like an opinion of that particular person. And, unfortunately, it is related to the fact that I'd disclosed my bipolar to that employer. And the annoying thing is like 15 years later, this individual comes out in the industry and writes an article about neurodiversity within the industry, and the fact that he was suffering at the time from mental health issues. And for him, that comes across as an extremely positive thing to do. And for someone like me, who necessarily doesn't stick my head above the parapet, it's extremely difficult. And this was all happening when I was 27 years old, so it was very difficult to understand at the time. Moving forward to 2000, I'd had a job interview in Farringdon. It had gone really, really well. They liked me. I'd had about series of about 3 different interviews. They were getting to the point of offering, and I just thought the honest thing to do is to tell them, disclose the mental illness, and hopefully everything would be okay. Unfortunately, after I disclosed, less than 12 hours later, they said, sorry, you're not right for this company, blah, 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 blah. They gave me a company line as to the reason why I hadn't got the job. After that experience, I kind of said to myself, hang on a second here, this isn't good. I need to keep my mouth shut. I need to be extremely careful about how I disclose my illness, or else it's going to cause me problems. 2001, another year later, a line manager asked me, "Oh, you think differently. You're very interested in the way that you approach problems." He asks me to kind of explain why I think differently, and under the circumstances at the time in the meeting, which is a 1-to-1, I disclose my illness, and then as soon as I've disclosed the illness, he starts to tell other people in the company, this guy isn't right in his head, which is extremely disappointing and extremely heartbreaking and upsetting when you thought that the guy was being empathetic. A year later, the same year, once the secret was out, different people in the departments were asking me questions about what they'd heard, because it was gossip. They wanted to know particular things. And one individual, I'd gone to school to work in a yellow t-shirt. The yellow t-shirt just happened to be, near the exit of my wardrobe. There was no reason for me to wear that other than the fact that there was bright sunshine and I felt like I wanted to wear a yellow t-shirt. And I go to work, and this individual said, are you wearing that t-shirt because you're feeling a bit manic? And again, this sort of stuff hits dead central solar plexus, upsets you, makes you feel small. In a sense, this guy was saying, I know your secret's out, and I want to make you feel uncomfortable about it. I want to make you feel difficult because I know your secret. 2003, a couple of years later, in a new job, unfortunately, Frank Bruno, the boxer, it was disclosed in the newspapers that he was bipolar and that he'd been, incarcerated in a mental health facility, and it was the front page news on the national newspapers. And one of the newspapers. The Sun had written a particular headline which had stimulated, again, the same negative sentiment towards mental illness. So unfortunately, there was an email alias at work which was everybody could gossip, and this individual had started to put information through this conduit, which was an audience of upwards probably about 180 people, and on the floor that I worked on there was about 150 people, and this individual started to take Frank Bruno to pieces, poking fun at him, just in general, not being very nice. And at the time, I'm on that alias and I'm receiving these emails. And obviously, for me, being a bipolar individual, it feels terrible to hear that, because it makes you think, what are other people saying when I'm not in the room? Or if they knew, what would they be saying if they were in the room? A year later, I had a bit of a wobble. It wasn't an episode, but I decided to go to HR and tell them the whole story. And once I'd done this, aged about 32, all my promotions ended. There was no way I was ever going to get promoted. That it was the end of my career, pretty much. Age 32, 2004. 2005, I'd started to try and open up and talk to people about what I was going through, what my condition was, and I was facing kind of, at times in social situations where there was alcohol, certain people who were drunk being quite condescending or mentioning relatives like a crazy uncle. We've all got someone that we know who has something wrong with them, and therefore there's nothing to worry about. But the way that it's put across is, again, condescending, and it's quite difficult to be on the end of that, because the person who's saying it doesn't have the condition. They're just trying to make you feel better by doing it the best that they can do. And unfortunately, it's not trained, or it's not very well. It's not a decent way to do it. 2008, I unfortunately, after I'd had my first child, my doctor had decided to change my medication. Unfortunately, I agreed to it, which I probably shouldn't have done at the time, but I ended up where the lack of sleep was getting to me, and I wasn't performing in the greatest way at work, admittedly. But as soon as they started to ask me questions about that, when they find out that you've got a mental illness, they begin the process of driving you out of the business because they don't want you to be around. 2009, a year or so later, I had to take time off work. I wasn't looking after myself. I wasn't sleeping very well. It was the period of time when Michael Jackson had died, and I was staying up late at night. I was drinking alcohol, all the things that you shouldn't have done, but it was related to stress and the way that I was coping with things at that particular time. I ended up being hospitalized, and I had an agreement with my employer at the time to allow me to have around and about 6 weeks off during Wimbledon of 2009. When I went back to work, everything had changed, and there was no way that my line manager after that was going to give me any responsibility or allow me to grow in terms of career responsibility. They felt like that I couldn't handle things as a 37-year-old, which was again massively disappointing. At the same time, I had friends who came to visit me in the hospital at the time. They would look at other individuals or patients within the hospital, and they would say, you know, I wish I'd never seen you in that space because I didn't realize, that you were so ill, and they never contemplated that in all the years that I'd known them before they came to visit me. And again, that's heartbreaking because they're really close friends, and then they decide that they've seen you in a incapacitated situation, and therefore the association of that is something that they don't want to be around. So then they start to withdraw away from you. Again, going back to the kind of the previous disclosure to the line manager at the time in 2009, after that point, I just kind of felt that the team that I was working on, they were, making fun about certain things, or kind of having a particular, interest in making sure that I was on top of what I was doing, making sure that I wasn't stressed. But in general, there was this feeling of being slightly undermined by the way that they referred to me at that particular time. Then in 2015, after I'd left that company and I was freelancing, I came across this weird situation where my 15 years ago, 20 years ago, a couple of guys that I was working with in an agency at that particular time, obviously they've moved into senior positions and they're looking to hire new people into their organizations. And unfortunately, the hiring manager had accepted my application for a role. When the role had been circulated internally in that company, these two individuals jumped on it and said, we don't want that guy working in this agency because he's not right in the head. And then the hiring manager got back in touch with me and said, unfortunately, I know I did say that you'd got the job, but 7 hours later, you haven't got the job. And the only reason why I know this is because I had a friend who was working in the same vicinity as these two individuals, and that information got out to me at a later date. And to hear that kind of stuff is, again, heartbreaking, very difficult to take on the chin, and unfortunate, and is endemic of people who've got mental illnesses. That nobody wants to work with you. Even other people that I've worked with in the past, where I've had a contract, maybe a freelance contract, all the work has gone very well, and you disclose, but in the future you go back and make another application to the same organization, and they would say, no thank you, we don't want you to come back. So the bottom line is, from the last examples that I've just given you, this is how it boils down. This guy can ruin my reputation if I hire him and he flips out and does something crazy. That's the perception. Another perception is, if I do hire this guy, I will not expose him to too much pressure. I will protect him from himself. Or I want to protect my staff from this guy because they feel threatened by him. he has the potential to harm. And this is all devoid. This isn't done with my disclosure. This isn't done with a conversation with me. This is a judgment that is made and dropped upon me afterwards. Another one. I need to warn you about this guy because I found him not to be right in the head. That's devastating for people to be spreading that information about you. Another one, you know, from a friend, a deep friend, after all these years, I've never realized how messed up you are. That's heartbreaking to be on the end of that. Or someone who's just going to kind of sit back and just go, I don't care. I'm going to make fun of you because I find you weird and quirky. So you're my social punch bag. And that's simple. That's the, beginning and end of it. That's where it sits. It's just like someone just feels like you're the village idiot and you deserve to be made fun of. And you got no, you're not involved in that dialogue. It's not your conversation. It's about you. It's not involving you. And that's essentially bullying. I'm a peaceful man with a solid marriage, having raised 2 wonderful children, and that is it. There's no skeletons in my closet. I'm not a misogynist or a bully. I haven't caused a single corporate embarrassment in a 20-year career in advertising, but I've definitely seen a few people who have done that. Think about the effect that you might be having on someone else and their family by choosing to react in a certain way about this. I'm ultimately threatened by losing my home and ending up on benefits because of an unnecessary judgment about a condition that I've got. And that I've lived with it and managed it since 1996. That's a whole 22 years without hurting anybody. Physically, mentally, years. Could you put up with this level of marginalization and questioning? Could you survive it? What if the roles were reversed and I was judging you and your biology, and I'm not even a doctor? I'm not a psychiatrist. So what right do I have to cast judgment? You are not responsible for your illness. It happened to you. You are, however, responsible for your recovery. And Mood Awakenings forms part of that. Not just for me, but for the people who follow this vlog. Thanks a lot.